Why am I here? I'm not an impact investor or a social entrepreneur. I'm a British politician. And Britain is just 22 days away from arguably the most important general election in my lifetime. So what am I doing here? I will travel a long way to avoid talking about Brexit, but this is ridiculous. The truth is I'm here because I think this movement, this network, this conversation is incredibly important, and I feel that it has reached a critical point of inflection. And I wanted to come and test the network, understand a bit where you have all got to in the last few years while I've been off doing other things. And I'm really impressed. Because, of course, this conversation cannot be about just moving a bit of money around, putting a new badge on it, and the elite feeling better about themselves. If it's that, we fail. It's not that. It's something much more profound than that. It's a conversation around how our societies need to work in the future and what needs to change. And what needs to change is difficult because it's mindsets and systems and processes that we have built over time and which have worked for us in the past, but which are not going to work for us in the future in the face of the threats and the risks that we look at today, which are different. We watched some videos last night, and I'm sure, like you, I was listening to every word that Ronnie Cohen said in his video, but my attention slipped for a second to the bookshelf behind him. And there I was thinking, well, I wonder what Ronnie's reading. And there on the bookshelf behind him was a whole row of books, and one of them in a red cover was Utopia for Realists. I have no idea what this book is about, but it seems like a very good title for this conversation, because this conversation has moved on from dreamy, naive idealism, which was the conversation 5-6 years ago, and you need naivety and vision to move people. But what's impressed me is that this is a conversation about the realism and the nuts and bolts and the plumbing that needs to change for systems to change. And I genuinely congratulate you. I know that lots of people have used quotes. It takes something for an Englishman to quote a Frenchman. But the great French writer Victor Hugo once said, "There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come." And I think the impact economy is an idea whose time has come. I'm a politician, so I have to kind of feel the pulse of what people are thinking and what people are wanting. That's the idea, anyway. And I feel certainly in the UK, I don't know what Michelle and others think, but I really feel the changes is real. Consumers are judging brands in different ways, and that is being played back to us in the advertising billboards and the shelves of the supermarkets. The market is responding to the change that they feel in consumers' attitudes. As investors, we're beginning to want to feel better about what our money is supporting. We want more information about what our money is doing. I love the What If video, but in the UK, we're now, as Ronnie knows, we're assembling a new campaign called Make My Money Matter. And the starting point of that is we need to educate people about how their money is being managed and what it's doing at the moment, because they do not know. When you ask them a question about what they would like, as the British government has done recently, I think 7 out of 10 people in the survey said, yes, they wanted people and planet to be part of the investment choices around how their money is moved. People want something different. I have a ridiculous number of children. When I sit and listen to them talking about their dreams and their hopes and what they expect from employers in the world of work, it is completely different from when I was growing up. And that's borne out by all the surveys of that generation. And Thomas yesterday from Dr. Consulta, how inspiring that was, called for more risk takers. Well, in the UK, that's happening. I was Minister for Industry for a while, looking at the shifts in the formation of our economy. A lot of it is around growth of micro businesses. A lot of it is about growth of social enterprises, which is now on a very big scale in the UK. And I think something like 15% of our small and medium-sized companies, the engine room, the growth of our economy, define themselves as social enterprises. So investors, people, consumers, owners of assets, managers of assets are on the move. And I think this movement, this emerging shift in values, this reassertion of the value of social responsibility has extraordinary power and comes at a crucial time when we look at the huge social and environmental challenges we face, interconnected as they are, interconnected as we are. It frankly gives me hope. In fact, I'm so hopeful about it that I'm actually standing down from frontline politics because I'm no longer really convinced that being a member of parliament, as I have been for 14 years, or being a government minister, as I have been for 9 years, is really where the action is now in terms of driving the kind of system change that we need. So there is movement. It does feel real. But what about governments? And that's what Ronnie asked me to talk about. Why do governments need impact investment? And I speak, as Christina very nicely said, as one of the people working with Ronnie, Michelle, and Cliff, and many other people in this room, to do what we did in the UK back in 2010-11 to systematically try and build an impact investment market. So why in the 21st century do governments need impact investment? I don't think the answer to that question is simply because governments need more money. Yes, many governments, including my own, are cash-strapped. Yes, of course, ministers will always want more money for their pet projects. But I don't think governments need impact investment simply because they need more money. There are much deeper reasons. And the first I would suggest is one familiar to you because I know it must have been discussed at all the impact summits. It's governments need impact investment because they need to deliver better results for the people they serve. And I think what has changed is the sense of urgency around that in recent months, in recent years. Governments are under a lot of pressure in an age when people are much better informed and more empowered. I was encouraged to look at a brilliant example in Brazil of MGov, using mobile technology to give over 1 million Brazilians to date new power in expressing their view on the public services that they receive or don't receive. And as we know, we live in an age where people are just increasingly ready to take their protest to the street, whether it be Santiago, Paris, London, or Hong Kong. We're under extraordinary pressure to deliver modern services, greater fairness, more progress against rising public expectations, and again, against a background of accelerating change and increasing complexity, and the dark side of all the positive stuff that we're talking about, increased division, increased extremism, increased populism, increased public anger that is ever easier to mobilize through modern communication. We were talking about Santiago yesterday. You know, the shock for me and the tragedy of that, this is Chile, which for years has been held up as the economic success story of Latin America. But the people are angry on the street. I've come from London, where our streets are regularly clogged up by protesters demanding greater urgency from the government in the face of the climate emergency. And we're a country that takes some pride, and I think some legitimate pride, in the leadership we have shown on the climate change issue over many decades. But our people are not satisfied. They're demanding more, and they're right. So how should governments respond? Well, in the world of business and civil society, the social sector, the only way to stay on top of change and complexity is to embed a genuine culture of innovation and openness to doing things in different ways. And governments find this difficult. What I am not saying is that governments have no role to play or have had no role to play in the process of innovation. In fact, if you look at the history of progress, our progress as a species, and you look at the development of game-changing things like, aviation or the development of nuclear energy or biotechnology or nanotechnology or communications and the internet, you will find in the history of that development, you will find state actors, state money, people taking risk because they can do so in different ways, committing research. In all those critical breakthroughs, you will find some state intervention. States have a critical role to play in driving innovation. But in terms of developing a culture of innovating, in terms of delivering services to the public, it is difficult. Now, I am generalizing terribly, and I'm sorry if I insult your government. But in my experience, the culture of government, or most of the democracies that I've observed or worked with, is not well suited for encouraging innovation and driving long-term system change. The culture of government is risk-averse. We are very scared of failing. And that is a problem. And yet we are extraordinarily complacent about the risk and the opportunity cost attached to the status quo. Instead of being open, we tend to be closed. Policy formation tends to be dominated by an elite thinking of, instead of thinking long-term, horizons tend to be short-term, dominated by electoral cycles and the life expectancy of a minister. So in my country, if you become a government minister, you can expect to be in post for about 2 years. It'll be 9 years. I think they forgot about me. 2 years. That is your life expectancy as a minister in the UK in terms of your post. Bear that in mind. I don't know how it is in your country. That is a very short window of opportunity to do anything meaningful. And of course, as you've discussed, ad nauseam, measurement lacks rigor because it's focused too much on inputs and activity rather than the only thing that matters, that is outcomes. Instead of thinking about how the most complex issues could be tackled by government departments working together, we tend still to think and work in silos, and there's very rarely any genuine understanding of the value that the private sector and civil society can bring, or how that is best harnessed. I am generalizing. That is what I have observed over many years. That is not a culture that is conducive to the kind of impact revolution that we are all want to see. In the UK, we made a genuine attempt to change this, and it came from the top, as Ronnie knows, and this is an important point. Anything that we've achieved in the UK, and we're nowhere near where we need to be yet, came from the strong leadership that was shown by Prime Minister David Cameron back in 2010. The signal that he sent of the need to change, the fact that it was driven from the centre of government in the Cabinet Office was critical. But our starting point was a very, very simple belief that governments do not have all the answers. We had allowed the value of social responsibility to diminish in our society over many years. The question was, too much, what are they going to do about it? What we tried to point out is it's not really about them, it's about us, and what are we going to do about it, to requote Kennedy. And we just believe very strongly we could find better solutions to some of the most stubborn social problems that we had if we could get open government, socially motivated business, and empowered civil society to work together in a meaningful way. And key to that was a recognition that we needed to commission services in a different way that created more space for our social entrepreneurs, much closer to the problems, more trusted by, more knowledgeable about the beneficiaries, the people that we're trying to help. 2 big changes were necessary. The first, we had to make it easier for social organizations to access public contracts in a way that allowed them to play to their strengths and earn a proper return for success. We wanted a commission system that really had a genuine weighting for social value that saw impact investment as a running partner, if you like, that could bring a powerful dynamic of greater rigor and discipline in clarifying objectives, more transparency and accountability, the right incentives for innovation, long-term commitment, and critically, an ability to risk failure, because risk is shared or even transferred. I still believe that it is this discipline and this framework for encouraging innovation that is at the heart of why governments need impact investment, because it allows them to be more effective in allocating the resources that the public give them. It's as simple as that. So in the first instance, we had to make it easier for people, social entrepreneurs, to access public service contracts. And second, we had to make it easier for social entrepreneurs to access the right kind of finance that allows them to grow and do more. And this mission to grow a functioning investment market was at the core of the agenda for change. So I think you probably know the story, but we mobilized dormant assets at scale. We established Big Society Capital as the first impact investment wholesaler, and we gave it a huge amount of money, £600 million, so that mainstream financial institutions would notice it. And they did. And we gently persuaded, didn't we, Ronnie, our 4 biggest banks to be shareholders in it. And they are. I Around it, we built an ecosystem of funds to support investment readiness. We supported social impact bonds, payment by result contracts, not least through making outcome funds available. We introduced tax incentive for social investment. We introduced new commissioners for policing and health. We encouraged the development of, and we span them out, of public sector mutuals, because there are social entrepreneurs operating inside the public sector who need to be liberated. We brought in new law, the Social Value Act, to require public sector commissioners to consider social value in their decisions. We created commissioning academies to encourage best practice. We created a system of what works centers to be hubs of knowledge to inform evidence-based commissioning. We opened up government data and policy making. We invested in impact measurement. We invested in being more transparent about the cost to the taxpayer of addressing social issues so that we could start establishing a rate card of prices that government was prepared to pay for outcomes. You might be interested to know, for example, that in the UK, a child taken into state care costs just over £64,000 a year. Quite tired just reading out that list. We threw everything at it. We pulled every lever that we had as investor, as regulator, as market builder. Has it worked? Well, I'm reminded of the Chinese premier who was asked in 1972 about the impact of the French Revolution that had happened 200 years before. And he said very softly, "It's too early to say." We certainly have a much more reliable supply of mission-aligned capital to respond to opportunity. It is easier to raise money, and it's quicker to raise money. Alongside co-investors, and I know Cliff Pryor is here doing a great job as CEO, Big Sided Capital has, I think, made almost £2 billion worth of capital available to social enterprises and charities alongside co-investors. That's serious money. We've got a series of dedicated funds, now a proper ecosystem of funds. And I was talking to Michelle at Bridges last night, and something has happened while I've been doing other things. The energy has moved from central government to local authorities, to local government. This matters a great, great deal. The central government's got a bit distracted by this Brexit thing. But an engine is running here. So Michelle was telling me that Bridges have now invested in 40 social impact bonds. Outcome payments of about £350 million have been made in the UK. And we're dealing with SIBs that are dealing with some of the people that are most marginalized in our society. As I understand it, the multiple of savings to the taxpayer to payments made to investors is around 2 times. This is starting to feel very serious indeed, and we're seeing impact investors take a lead in presenting solutions to some very stubborn problems, and that's really the test. That's what gets noticed. So we have a problem in the UK about finding accommodation and homes for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. It's an impact investment intermediary, social and sustainable capital, on whose board I sat for a while, that has come up with a solution that is gone to investors, raised serious money, is going to raise more to enable a system change and empowering of social landlords to go and buy and rent accommodation for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Government has had very little to do with this. This is something that is being driven by the impact investment movement in an increasingly conspicuous way, and people are noticing it. I've showed off a bit. Let me be very candid about a failure, and it's a very important failure. Ronnie may disagree with this, but it's what I feel as a politician, is I think we failed or we did not do well enough in terms of the public narrative, or the narrative to the public. In fact, we struggled to build trust around this whole agenda. It wasn't the fault of Ronnie or the people in the impact movement. It was a government failing. Because when we talked about our desire to get socially motivated capital in, impact investment, social investment in, people in our country thought that that was a cover for cuts in public expenditure. We struggled to build trust in the agenda, and I think that may have affected how my contemporaries as ministers now feel about this agenda. They were bitten last time. And we must never lose sight of the importance of the narrative and the story to people. So we did a lot of very good things in the UK. It seems to be working. Lots of frustration, lots of plumbing to fix. But the bit we didn't get quite right was the narrative and the story to the public. And I need to be very honest about that. I want to say something briefly about scale, because the real test of the impact economy and impact investment is people seeing new solutions to old problems being delivered at scale. Here in Argentina, I'm so excited to hear from Seb. Last night we gave an award to the Buenos Aires city for their work on regularizing settlements and slums. The Buenos Aires piece sits in a national project now of very big scale and ambition. I find that incredibly exciting. That is impact investment leading that. Let me take you to another continent, the continent that is hosting our summit next year, Africa. I was our Africa minister for a while, responsible for how we spend almost £4 billion of annual aid. And it allowed me to speak to many African leaders about their priorities. Time and time again, they would say, my priority is energy and electricity for my people. And hundreds of millions of people in Africa live without access to something that we take for granted and which we know is transformational to our lives. And of course, there is no shortage of private investment or project finance being thrown at this problem at scale, but a lot of it is focused on-grid solutions that are complex, costly, take a lot of time. And it is sadly inevitable, or was inevitable, that large minorities in many of these countries will never have access to the grid. So the solution was off-grid energy, solar off-grid, driven by plummeting costs of technology and a game-changing innovation, British-led, I'm really pleased to say, in how people can pay in installments through their mobile phone. This technology, life changes, and I've seen it for myself in villages in Ethiopia and Mozambique, is now accessible and affordable and is being driven by a market. And what I want to do as Africa Minister was challenge the aid model and say, no, actually we want to support a market solution here, empowering, not creating dependency. And so we set up a campaign called Energy Africa, and I just briefly mentioned one platform, tiny compared to some of the money that's spent, tiny compared to initiatives such as the African Development Bank's new credit line in this area. But Energize Africa is an online platform that I do, invest through as an impact investor, lending money to companies such as Bebop and Delight who need it for working capital. And British investors through this platform, modest scale as it is, having already invested in short about £12 million, got £4 million back, and are providing clean electricity to almost 500,000 people in Africa already. And I mention this, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a retail impact investment opportunity. This is not some remote world of institutional investments. This is something that that talks to me on my mobile phone, that I can connect with. I can see the impact. I understand it. This is about connecting people to impact investment and making sure that it is not remote. And it's a good, for me, example of a retail rather than institutional investment opportunity that is helping to roll out new market-based solutions at a scale and pace that governments cannot claim on their own. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, governments need impact economies because, frankly, they go with the grain of what people think and want now. They can provide the tools that can transform the effectiveness of how governments spend the money given them by taxpayers. They can help revolutionize how consumers, investors, and employees can help tackle some of the social environmental challenges we have. It can help create good jobs in a world that is going to need them, because automation is going to take away a lot of jobs. And it is an answer to the many people now very publicly, and they are in my country as well, challenging the free market model of capitalism, because it demonstrates that the modern capitalist system is motivated by more than profit. But we have to prove it. We have to prove it. This has to be real. And we are all in this room at different stages on our journey. Can I just say finally, and on a personal level, how pleased I am that Latin America is now so clearly part of the global movement. For me, it's personal. I went in the mid-90s to Sao Paulo to set up a business for a British company. They were happy years. It's not just that I went out with 2 children and came back with 4. It's because I came back also with an enduring respect for the creativity and drive that I saw all around me. The unwillingness to accept or even say the word no. The ability to steer around the many rocks in the road, the desire for progress and social justice. And we are all going to need that creativity and tenacity on the next stage of the journey. But what a prize, ladies and gentlemen, if we can realize the potential we all see to mobilize trillions of private capital for public good. What an opportunity to improve so many lives around the world and bring greater security and sense of harmony to a world that feels very insecure and very divided. We all have a part to play as realists on the journey to utopia. And I congratulate you all for your individual leadership, and I wish you every success. Thank you for inviting me.